In the summer of 1992, the Florida Everglades stretched endlessly under a blazing sun, its sawgrass prairies and cypress domes hiding secrets that would remain buried for over 2 decades. This is the story of Sarah Michelle Chen, a 28-year-old marine biologist whose passion for the natural world would lead her into the heart of one of America's most unforgiving wilderness areas and into a mystery that would haunt her family for 26 years. Sarah lived in a modest apartment in Homestead, Florida, just 20 miles from the entrance to Everglades National Park. Every morning, she would wake before dawn, brew her coffee in a thermos decorated with dolphin stickers, and drive her white Honda Civic to the research station where she worked as part of a team studying the declining populations of native fish species. Her colleagues remember her as meticulous and dedicated, someone who would spend hours in the sweltering heat collecting water samples and documenting wildlife behavior with the patience of a saint. Born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrants, Sarah had moved to Florida 3 years earlier to pursue her master's degree at the University of Miami. Her parents, David and Linda Chen, ran a small restaurant in Chinatown and had initially been skeptical of their daughter's decision to study swamp creatures, as her father jokingly called her research subjects. But they had come to understand her passion, especially after she sent them photographs of the incredible biodiversity she encountered daily, from gentle manatees to prehistoric-looking alligators. Sarah's routine was predictable and safe. She worked Monday through Friday at the research station, spent weekends visiting her friend Maria Gonzalez in Miami, and called her parents every Sunday evening without fail. She was dating Tom Bradley, a park ranger she had met during her first month in Florida, and they had recently begun discussing marriage. Tom would later tell investigators that Sarah seemed happier than ever in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, excited about a promotion opportunity that would allow her to lead her own research project. If you enjoy real mysteries like this one, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any cases. On the morning of July the 15th, 1992, Sarah followed her usual routine. She arrived at the research station at 6:30 in the morning, greeted her supervisor, Dr. James Morrison, and reviewed her planned route for the day. She was scheduled to collect samples from a remote area of the park known as Shark Valley, about 40 miles from the main visitor center. The location was accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through dense sawgrass and scattered tree islands. Dr. Morrison later recalled that Sarah seemed in good spirits that morning. "She was excited about the readings we've been getting from that area," he told police. "The water quality data suggested we might find some interesting species diversity there. Sarah was always eager to explore new sites." Sarah packed her usual equipment: water quality testing kits, sample containers, her waterproof notebook, and a GPS device that was considered state-of-the-art technology at the time. She also carried a two-way radio, standard safety equipment for researchers working alone in the Everglades. The radio had a range of approximately 10 miles under ideal conditions, though the dense vegetation and flat terrain of the Everglades often reduced that range significantly. She left the research station at 8:15 in the morning, driving a government-issued Jeep equipped with oversized tires designed for navigating the unpaved trails that crisscrossed the park. Her last radio check-in was at 10:45, when she reported that she had reached her destination and was beginning to collect samples. Her voice sounded normal, even cheerful, according to Dr. Morrison, who was monitoring communications from the station. "Sample collection proceeding normally," Sarah had said. "Water clarity is excellent, and I'm seeing good fish activity. Should be finished here by 2 o'clock. But 2 o'clock came and went without another radio transmission. Dr. Morrison began trying to raise Sarah on the radio at 2:15. Calling her every 10 minutes. When she still hadn't responded by 4 o'clock, he contacted the Park Service's emergency response team. The search began immediately. Tom Bradley, Sarah's boyfriend, was part of the initial response team that headed out to Shark Valley as the sun was beginning to set. They found Sarah's Jeep parked exactly where she had reported her location, about 2 miles down a narrow trail that was barely wide enough for a vehicle. The Jeep was unlocked, with her purse still on the passenger seat containing her wallet, driver's license, and $63 in cash. Her research equipment was scattered around a small clearing about 50 yards from the Jeep, near the edge of a canal that ran parallel to the trail. Some of the sample containers were filled and properly labeled, suggesting that Sarah had been working for some time before whatever happened to her occurred. Her waterproof notebook lay open to a page dated July 15th, with neat handwriting documenting water temperature and pH levels. The final entry was timed at 11:37 in the morning. Most puzzling was the condition of her two-way radio. It was found 20 feet from her other equipment, partially submerged in shallow water at the canal's edge. The radio appeared to have been thrown or dropped with considerable force. Its plastic casing was cracked, and the antenna was bent at an unnatural angle. Later analysis would reveal that the radio had been damaged deliberately, not by accident. The search for Sarah Chen became one of the most extensive missing person investigations in Everglades National Park history. Within 24 hours, more than 50 park rangers, local police officers, and volunteers were combing the area where she had vanished. Helicopters equipped with heat-sensing equipment flew grid patterns over thousands of acres of wilderness, while teams on airboats searched the countless waterways that thread through the Everglades like a liquid maze. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement took over the case on July 18th, 3 days after Sarah's disappearance. Detective Raymond Ray Sullivan, a 20-year veteran of missing person cases, was assigned as the lead investigator. Sullivan had worked dozens of cases in the Everglades over his career, but he would later say that Sarah's disappearance was unlike anything he had encountered. Most people who go missing in the Everglades either had an accident, fell into water, got lost, encountered an alligator, or they were running from something, Sullivan explained to reporters at the time. But Sarah's case didn't fit any of those patterns. She was an experienced researcher who knew the area well. Her equipment suggested she'd been working normally right up until she vanished. And then there was that radio. The deliberately damaged radio suggested that Sarah's disappearance was not accidental. But if she had been abducted or attacked, where was the evidence? The soft ground around the canal showed Sarah's footprints clearly, but there were no signs of a struggle, no other footprints, and no tire tracks besides those from her own Jeep. The first major theory to emerge focused on the possibility of an alligator attack. The Everglades are home to an estimated 200,000 American alligators, and while attacks on humans are relatively rare, they do occur. The area where Sarah was working was known to have a healthy alligator population, and several large specimens had been spotted in the canal near where her equipment was found. Wildlife experts brought in to consult on the case acknowledged that an alligator could potentially take a person without leaving obvious signs of struggle, especially if the victim was caught by surprise near the water's edge. However, they noted several factors that made this theory unlikely. First, alligator attacks typically occur during dawn, dusk, or nighttime hours, not during the middle of the day when Sarah disappeared. Second, Sarah was an experienced researcher who would have been aware of alligator safety protocols. Third, and most importantly, there was no explanation for why the radio had been deliberately damaged if Sarah had simply been the victim of an animal attack. As the initial search stretched into its second week without finding any trace of Sarah, investigators began exploring other possibilities. They interviewed everyone Sarah had come into contact with in the days leading up to her disappearance, looking for any signs of conflict or unusual behavior. Tom Bradley, her boyfriend, was questioned extensively, as romantic partners are often suspects in missing person cases. However, Tom had a solid alibi for the entire day Sarah disappeared. He had been leading a group of park visitors on a guided tour of the Anhinga Trail, with more than 20 witnesses who could confirm his whereabouts. Moreover, colleagues and friends described Tom and Sarah's relationship as stable and loving, with no history of arguments or jealousy. Sarah's research supervisor, Dr. Morrison, was also investigated thoroughly. Police examined the possibility that Sarah might have discovered something in her research that someone wanted to keep hidden, perhaps evidence of illegal dumping or poaching in the park. However, a review of Sarah's research notes and data revealed nothing unusual or controversial. Her work focused on fish population studies that were unlikely to threaten anyone's interests. The investigation expanded to include Sarah's personal life in Miami and her connections to the Chinese American community in South Florida. Detectives wondered if her disappearance might be connected to her family's background or business interests. However, interviews with her parents, David and Linda Chen, revealed no evidence of family conflicts, financial troubles, or connections to criminal activity. As summer turned to fall, the official search was scaled back, though it never officially ended. Detective Sullivan continued working the case, following up on tips and leads that came in regularly. Over the years, dozens of reported sightings of Sarah were investigated throughout Florida and beyond, but none proved credible. The case took an unexpected turn in 1994 when a park maintenance worker found human remains about 5 miles from where Sarah had disappeared. The discovery generated intense media attention and renewed hope among Sarah's family that they might finally have answers. However, forensic analysis revealed that the remains belonged to a man who had been missing from the Miami area for several months, not to Sarah. Throughout the 1990s, advances in forensic technology brought new hope to the investigation. DNA analysis became more sophisticated, allowing investigators to extract genetic material from smaller and more degraded samples. However, without any physical evidence from Sarah's disappearance, no blood, tissue, or personal items beyond what was found at the scene, there was nothing new to analyze. Detective Sullivan retired in 2002, but he continued to think about Sarah's case. "It stayed with me," he said in a later interview. "There were just too many questions without answers. Why was that radio destroyed? Where did she go? If someone took her, how did they get her out of there without leaving any tracks?" The case was passed to Detective Maria Santos, who brought fresh eyes to the decades-old mystery. Santos was particularly intrigued by the damaged radio and spent considerable time researching similar cases across the country. She discovered several instances where people had deliberately destroyed their own communication devices before disappearing, sometimes as part of suicide attempts, other times when they were planning to start new lives elsewhere. This led Santos to explore the possibility that Sarah had staged her own disappearance, perhaps to escape some unknown pressure or problem in her life. However, this theory faced significant obstacles. Sarah had never withdrawn any large amounts of money from her bank accounts, had made no unusual travel arrangements, and had left behind all of her identification documents. Moreover, her family and friends insisted that she had shown no signs of depression or desire to disappear. In 2007, 15 years after Sarah's disappearance, the case received renewed attention when the television show Unsolved Mysteries featured her story. The episode generated hundreds of tips from viewers across the country, but again, none led to significant breakthroughs. However, the show did introduce Sarah's case to a new generation of amateur investigators and online sleuths who began discussing the mystery on internet forums and early social media platforms. One theory that gained traction online was the possibility that Sarah had encountered drug smugglers operating in the remote areas of the Everglades. South Florida, in the 1990s, was a major corridor for cocaine trafficking from South America, and the vast, sparsely populated wilderness of the Everglades provided ideal conditions for clandestine operations. Investigators had always considered this possibility, but there was no evidence linking Sarah's disappearance to drug activity. The breakthrough that would finally solve Sarah's case came from an unexpected source in February of 2018. Jake Morrison, a 24-year-old wildlife photographer from Minnesota, was visiting the Everglades with his girlfriend, Emma Patterson, hoping to capture images of the park's famous alligators and birds. Jake was not related to James Morrison, Sarah's former supervisor, despite sharing the same last name. The couple had hired a local guide, Carlos Mendez, to take them to some of the more remote areas of the park where wildlife viewing was optimal. Mendez, who had been guiding tourists in the Everglades for over 30 years, knew the waterways and wildlife patterns better than almost anyone. On the morning of February 23rd, Mendez guided Jake and Emma to a secluded area about 3 miles from where Sarah Chen had disappeared 26 years earlier. They were hoping to photograph a large bull alligator that Mendez had been tracking for several weeks, an impressive specimen that measured over 12 feet in length. As they approached the alligator's favored basking spot, they found something unusual. The massive reptile was lying motionless on the bank, and even from a distance, it was clear that something was wrong. As they got closer, they realized the alligator was dead, apparently from natural causes related to its advanced age. Jake, who had a particular interest in natural history and animal skulls, asked Mendez if they could examine the deceased alligator more closely. What they discovered would reopen one of South Florida's most enduring mysteries. Inside the alligator's stomach cavity, partially digested but still recognizable, was a distinctive piece of jewelry, a gold necklace with a small jade pendant carved in the shape of a dolphin. The necklace was distinctive enough that Jake photographed it carefully before Mendez suggested they should report their find to park authorities. When park rangers arrived to examine the scene, they immediately recognized the potential significance of the discovery. The necklace matched exactly the description of jewelry that Sarah Chen had been wearing the day she disappeared, according to statements her boyfriend Tom Bradley had given to police 26 years earlier. Detective Santos, now the senior investigator on cold cases for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, was contacted immediately. When she saw the photographs of the necklace, she felt a chill of recognition. She had studied Sarah's case file hundreds of times over the years, and she remembered Tom Bradley's detailed description of the dolphin pendant that Sarah never took off, a gift from her parents to celebrate her graduation with her master's degree. The discovery of Sarah's necklace inside the alligator provided the first concrete evidence of what had happened to her, but it also raised new questions. DNA analysis of the necklace confirmed that it had belonged to Sarah Chen, but the condition of the jewelry and the size of the alligator that had consumed it told a complex story. Forensic experts who examined the alligator estimated that it was at least 40 years old, making it approximately 14 years old at the time of Sarah's disappearance. At that age, it would have been large enough to attack and kill a human, but probably not large enough to consume an entire adult person without leaving other remains. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic anthropologist brought in to consult on the case, offered a theory that finally made sense of all the evidence. Based on the condition of the necklace and what we know about alligator digestive processes, I believe Sarah's necklace was consumed by this alligator sometime shortly after her disappearance in 1992, Dr. Walsh explained. However, alligators don't typically consume jewelry intentionally. The most likely scenario is that the necklace was still attached to Sarah when the alligator encountered her remains. This led investigators to a grim but logical conclusion. Sarah had died near the water where her research equipment was found, and her body had been scavenged by the alligator. The damaged radio suggested that Sarah might have been trying to call for help when something happened to her, possibly a medical emergency like a heart attack, stroke, or severe allergic reaction. Dr. Walsh's theory was supported by what is known about alligator feeding behavior. Large alligators are opportunistic scavengers as well as active predators, and they will readily consume carrion they encounter in their territory. If Sarah had collapsed and died near the canal, it would have been natural for the resident alligator population to scavenge her remains. The mystery of the deliberately damaged radio was finally solved when investigators re-examined the original evidence photos with fresh eyes. What had appeared to be intentional damage was more likely the result of the radio being stepped on or struck by Sarah herself as she collapsed. The throwing pattern that had puzzled investigators for decades could be explained if Sarah had been holding the radio when she fell, causing it to fly from her hand and strike the ground with considerable force. In March of 2018, Detective Santos traveled to San Francisco to meet with Sarah's parents, David and Linda Chen, who were now in their 80s. The meeting was emotionally difficult for everyone involved, but the Chen family expressed gratitude for finally having some answers about their daughter's fate. "We always hoped she was still alive somewhere," Linda Chen said through tears. "But knowing what happened, knowing she didn't suffer for a long time, that brings us some peace. She was doing what she loved, studying the animals and the water. In a way, she became part of the place she cared so much about." The discovery also provided closure for Tom Bradley, Sarah's former boyfriend, who had remarried years earlier but had never stopped wondering about Sarah's fate. "I always blamed myself for not going with her that day," Bradley said. "But knowing it was probably a medical emergency, something nobody could have prevented, that helps. Sarah was so careful, so professional. If something happened to her out there, it wasn't because she made a mistake." Dr. James Morrison, Sarah's research supervisor, who was still working in marine biology at age 78, reflected on the case's resolution. "Sarah would have found it fascinating that an alligator held the key to solving her own disappearance," he said. "She always said that nature keeps its own records, that everything is connected in ways we don't always understand." In the end, she was right. The Sarah Chen case became a watershed moment for safety protocols in Everglades research. Following the resolution of her disappearance, the National Park Service implemented new requirements for researchers working alone in remote areas, including mandatory GPS tracking devices and emergency satellite communicators that work even in areas with no cell phone coverage. The case also highlighted the importance of never giving up on missing person investigations, even after decades have passed. Detective Santos, who had worked on Sarah's case for 16 years, noted that advances in forensic science and the dedication of investigators can sometimes provide answers when they are least expected. The investigation into Sarah's disappearance had consumed countless resources over the years. The initial search operation alone cost the Park Service over $200,000, involving helicopters, boats, tracking dogs, and specialized search equipment. Over the following decades, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement estimated that more than 500 hours of detective work had been dedicated to following up leads, interviewing witnesses, and re-examining evidence. Detective Santos had personally interviewed over 100 people connected to the case, from Sarah's college professors to casual acquaintances she had met in Florida. She had traveled to California twice to meet with Sarah's extended family, hoping to uncover some detail that might explain her disappearance. She had consulted with experts in alligator behavior, wilderness survival, criminal psychology, and even cult activity, exploring every possible angle. "Every few years, something would happen that would give us new hope," Santos recalled. "A new witness would come forward, or we'd get a tip about someone who matched Sarah's description. I probably chased down 50 different leads over the years. Each time, I thought this might be the one that breaks the case wide open." One of the most promising leads had come in 2003, when a woman in Orlando called police claiming she had seen Sarah working at a health food store. The woman was convinced she recognized Sarah from the missing person posters that still circulated occasionally in South Florida. Detective Santos drove to Orlando immediately, only to discover that the store employee was a different Asian woman who bore only a superficial resemblance to Sarah. Another significant lead emerged in 2009 when construction workers discovered human remains while building a new housing development in Homestead, just miles from where Sarah had lived. The remains were badly decomposed, but the victim appeared to be an Asian woman of approximately the right age. DNA testing revealed that the remains belonged to a different missing person from the 1980s, providing closure for another family, but leaving the Chen family still without answers. The emotional toll of the long investigation weighed heavily on everyone involved. Sarah's parents, David and Linda Chen, had aged visibly over the years, their hope gradually transforming into a kind of resigned acceptance. They had created a small shrine to Sarah in their San Francisco restaurant, displaying her graduation photo alongside fresh flowers that Linda replaced every week. For the first 5 years, every phone call made my heart race. Linda Chen explained during one of Detective Santos's visits. I thought every ring might be someone calling to say they found her. After 10 years, I stopped expecting good news. After 20 years, I just wanted to know what happened so we could finally say goodbye properly. Tom Bradley, Sarah's former boyfriend, had struggled with survivor's guilt for years after her disappearance. He had undergone counseling to deal with the trauma of losing someone so suddenly and mysteriously. He eventually married a fellow park ranger named Jennifer Walsh in 1998, but he admitted that Sarah's unsolved disappearance had cast a shadow over his ability to fully embrace happiness. I kept thinking that if I had insisted on going with her that day, she would still be alive, Bradley said. I knew the area she was researching better than she did. I could have spotted danger signs she might have missed. It took years of therapy to accept that I couldn't have known what was going to happen. Dr. Morrison, Sarah's research supervisor, had implemented several memorial initiatives over the years to honor her memory. The research station established the Sarah Chen Memorial Grant, which funded graduate student research in the Everglades. The grant had supported over 30 young scientists over the years, many of whom went on to make significant contributions to environmental conservation. The annual Sarah Chen Memorial Lecture became a respected event in the South Florida scientific community, featuring prominent researchers discussing challenges in environmental science. The lecture series helped keep Sarah's memory alive while advancing the kind of work she had been passionate about. The resolution of Sarah's case also had broader implications for missing person investigations in wilderness areas across the United States. The National Association of Search and Rescue Teams studied the case extensively, using it to develop new protocols for long-term missing person cases involving potential wildlife encounters. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the forensic anthropologist who had analyzed the alligator evidence, published a paper in the Journal of Forensic Sciences titled Scavenger Evidence in Long-Term Missing Person Cases: Lessons from the Everglades. The paper became required reading for forensic investigators working in areas with large predator and scavenger populations. But the Sarah Chen case demonstrates that we need to think differently about evidence in wilderness missing person cases, Dr. Walsh wrote. Traditional forensic approaches assume that evidence will remain in a fixed location, where it can be discovered by investigators. But in dynamic ecosystems like the Everglades, evidence can literally walk away, carried by the animals that inhabit these environments. The case also sparked discussions about the ethics of wildlife research in dangerous environments. Some argued that Sarah's death could have been prevented if researchers were required to work in pairs, while others maintained that the benefits of scientific research justified the risks involved. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission used Sarah's case to develop new safety training programs for researchers working in areas with large alligator populations. The training emphasized the importance of maintaining situational awareness, carrying multiple forms of emergency communication, and understanding alligator behavior patterns. Jake Morrison, the photographer whose discovery had solved the case, became an unexpected advocate for missing person cases involving wildlife encounters. He used his social media following to raise awareness about the challenges of searching for missing people in wilderness areas and the importance of supporting families during long-term investigations. Finding Sarah's necklace changed my perspective on nature photography, Morrison said. I realized that every time I'm out in the wilderness with my camera, I might be the person who discovers something important, something that could bring closure to a family that's been suffering for years. The alligator that had held the key to solving Sarah's mystery became the subject of extensive scientific study. Researchers at the University of Florida analyzed tissue samples from the animal to better understand alligator longevity and growth patterns in the Everglades ecosystem. The data contributed to ongoing conservation efforts aimed at protecting alligator populations from habitat loss and climate change. Sarah's case taught me that nature itself can be a witness, Santos said. That alligator carried evidence of what happened to her for 26 years. It reminds us that even in cases that seem completely cold, there might still be answers waiting to be discovered. The wildlife photographer Jake Morrison, whose discovery had finally solved the mystery, donated his photographs of the necklace and the alligator to the National Park Service archives. He and his girlfriend Emma later established a small scholarship fund in Sarah's name for graduate students studying marine biology in Florida. For the Chen family, the resolution of Sarah's case brought both closure and a renewed connection to the place where their daughter had spent her final years. Despite the tragic circumstances, they came to see the Everglades not as the place where Sarah died, but as the place where she had been happiest and most fulfilled. The massive alligator that had held the key to solving Sarah's disappearance was studied extensively by researchers after its death, contributing to scientific understanding of alligator longevity and behavior. In a fitting tribute to Sarah's memory, the data collected from the alligator was incorporated into ongoing research on Everglades ecosystem health, the same type of work that had brought Sarah to that remote canal on a July morning in 1992. Today, visitors to the Everglades can see a small memorial plaque near the research station where Sarah once worked. The plaque reads simply, "In memory of Sarah Michelle Chen, marine biologist, whose passion for understanding the natural world continues to inspire new generations of researchers." The Everglades keep their secrets well, but sometimes, if we listen carefully, they tell us their stories. The case of Sarah Chen's disappearance serves as a reminder that the natural world operates by its own timeline and its own logic. For 26 years, an aging alligator in the Florida Everglades carried within itself the answer to a mystery that had puzzled investigators and haunted a family. When that answer finally emerged, it came not through sophisticated forensic techniques or breakthrough investigative work, but through the simple curiosity of a young photographer who noticed something unusual in one of America's most wild and mysterious places. Sarah's story lives on in the safety protocols that now protect other researchers, in the scholarship that bears her name, and in the understanding that sometimes the most profound mysteries are solved not by human cleverness, but by the patient and inexorable processes of the natural world itself.